Um, Welcome to the very last of our many 15-minute presentations for the Birds and Bees Festival this year. Very glad you could join us. We have a very popular topic, of course, native plants for hummingbirds. And I would just like to say that Tracy Twombly, our presenter this afternoon, has a wonderful nursery there by Kansas City. I was able to visit it myself a couple weeks ago. So if if you live in the Kansas City area or are going to be traveling through, it's a really, really great place to go. Just a really nice and peaceful setting. So Tracy, over to you.
All right, thanks, Dana. Welcome, everybody. I am going to do a short introduction. As Dana was saying, my husband and I started a native plant nursery called So Wild Natives in Kansas City, Missouri. We opened in 2017. We're going on our 5th year right now. So yes, if you're in the Kansas City area looking for native wildflowers, you can stop by and see us. We're actually fairly close to the stadiums. So today we're going to be talking about hummingbird plants, and since these are nice lightning round 15-minute sessions, I'm going to cover 15 hummingbird plants in 15 minutes. Now I will caveat this by saying these are 15 plants that are most often visited in our gardens here at So Wild Natives. So there are other great hummingbird plants that are not in this presentation, but that's because we don't have them in our gardens. And just to give you, so things like trumpet creeper and oh gosh, there are lots of others. So don't think that this is the full list. But just to kind of give you some generalities of what we often see hummingbirds visit, as far as flower shape and flower color, they tend to be most attracted to shades of red, those bright red colors they like a lot. But they also visit many other colors. We have them visiting lots of purple flowers, especially seems to be, at least in our garden, the second favored color. But also white flowers they'll visit as well. They often visit plants that have a tubular shape that they stick their little beak down into to get the nectar at the end. But again, there are several exceptions to this. You might see them visiting a blazing star or even a sunflower. So again, these are general rules, but that's a good place to start if you're starting. Okay, so this is the #1 plant most visited by hummingbirds at our place. And so this is Royal Catchfly. And there are actually several plants in this Selene genus that flower red like this that hummingbirds will visit. This is one that we have in several places in around our place that gets visited a lot. We will have hummingbirds come into our high tunnels to visit this plant, and they especially like it. So it's good for full sun or part shade in a drier average condition. And I would highly recommend planting multiple of these together. Not only does it make a nice show to have multiple together, but it also helps the plant reproduce and reseed. Otherwise, it could be a short-lived perennial. Now the coral honeysuckle. So this is a native honeysuckle, and it is red and has a yellow inside, as you can kind of see from the picture there. Oh yes, I should also mention, on the right here you see why. Why do hummingbirds visit this? Most of these will say as a nectar source. Most of these plants are nectar sources for the hummingbirds. They're coming in, and that's why they're visiting. This one can also serve as a perch. So for some of this is a vine, this coral honeysuckle is a vine. So it likes to creep along the ground, but you can actually, we have ours, we're training it to go up a trellis, like a pergola. So with these vines kind of sticking out, they might perch on one of them and drink from a close flower. This is a fairly long blooming vine. It's actually, I just took this picture yesterday, I think. So it's blooming now, and it will bloom for several months. And yeah, just a wonderful plant to have there. Cardinal flower is, oh, I don't know if I mentioned this. I kind of ordered this as the most visited plants. So I'm kind of going in order of, based on my observations, these are the ones that have been visited by the most number of hummingbirds. So cardinal flower is the next most visited one. Again, planting these in bunches really can catch the eye of these hummingbirds as they're migrating. And if they see multiple together, they're more likely to stop at your yard. This is for later blooming, so this is their migration back. This is more late summer that you'll find them visiting the hummingbirds. The cardinal flower likes more shade. It can take full sun. It tends to like a little bit of shade and moisture conditions. Swamp milkweed. Now, this one actually kind of surprised me, but we see a lot of hummingbirds visit our swamp milkweed, and we see it visiting our common milkweed as well, but the swamp milkweed especially, we see more of them at. And it does kind of have a tubular flower in there a little bit, but I'm guessing it must have a nice nectar that they come and visit. This again blooms later in the year, kind of late summer, June to August. It likes average to wet conditions. And again, there's other milkweeds that can take other conditions, such as the common milkweed, if you're interested in something like this. This is one of my favorite plants, and one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite plants is because it's so versatile, and we have hummingbirds come to it. We actually have some foxglove beard tongue planted in a pot off of our back deck. So we just have hummingbirds coming. We'll be sitting on our back deck, and they'll be coming up to this pot and visiting the beard tongue, which is getting ready to bloom here pretty soon. It's going to start blooming here pretty soon, and then blooms for a couple months. Like I said, it works in several different conditions: shade to sun to fairly dry to actually fairly wet. So this is a great plant to add. There are also other penstemons. This is a penstemon genus, and they will visit the others as well. There's some pale beard tongue, and there's even a purple beard tongue. This is the one we see them visit. Again, it's a good nectar source. Bee balms. They love the bee balms. So there's a couple different bee balms that bloom at different times. So this one blooms later in the year, the Monarda fistulosa. Later in the summer, we see them visiting this quite often. There is Monarda bradburyana that blooms earlier in the year. Actually, it's just popping right now. Some of the blooms popped out today. It's another one for the early migration to catch, but again, a great nectar source and a beautiful bloom. And with several of these, especially something like this, you won't just get hummingbirds. You will get butterflies, you will get bees, you'll get all kinds of great creatures visiting the bee balms, the Monardas. Downy skullcap. Another nectar source that is later in the year. When we have this blooming out on the tables, those hummingbirds will be coming straight up to our display tables and drinking the nectar out of these. Again, later in the year, it can take part shade or it can take full sun and likes some drier conditions. Clammy Kaffia. So this is a tiny little flower. That picture is probably bigger than what the flower is in real life. It's a nectar source, but I also wonder, this is just me speculating, I haven't found any of this research. I wonder if the hummingbirds might also be visiting this plant to get insects, because it's called clammy for a reason. It's actually pretty sticky. So sometimes some insects get stuck to the stems of this plant. And I wouldn't be surprised if the hummingbirds were coming in to actually eat some insects off of this plant. It's a fairly long bloomer. It's getting ready, actually, some of them are getting ready to start blooming right now, maybe a little bit earlier than what it normally does. Will bloom through October. It has a nice fall red color as well, but it is an annual. It'll reseed. Blue sage, again, this is later in the year, into the summer. having this next to the downy skullcap, which we tend to have them close to each other on our display tables. They'll just zoom from one to the other, whoop, whoop, back and forth. So again, another tubular flower. It can take full sun to part shade, and again, likes the drier conditions. Hoary vervain. So this is another one where it has nectar source, but also insect source. This is another small little flower that gets pollinated by tiny little bees and flies. And the hummingbirds can come in for nectar, but also to eat those little bees and flies that are coming to pollinate this plant. I think this is an underappreciated plant in gardens. I think it's an adorable little flower, and again, attracts those tiny little bees and flies, which are really nice. Blooms mid to late summer, likes dry conditions, can take full baking sun. The worst condition you can find, it'll like it. Blazing stars. So pictured here is the prairie blazing star, but there are several species of blazing star, and pretty much any of them you can find hummingbirds coming to visit these guys, as well as if you're looking to try to attract a lot of different creatures, blazing stars are where it's at. I call this monarch candy because I could have a single stalk of blazing star and find like 12 monarchs and, another dozen skippers, and then you have bees and flies and beetles, and then occasionally you'll get a hummingbird to come visit as well. There are several, again, different liatrices, the blazing stars, that will work in different situations. So this one being the prairie blazing star likes it a little bit wetter, but you can find a blazing star for any condition. Columbine is another nectar source, blooms super early in the season, blooming now actually, likes really dry, can take full sun or can take full shade. So naturally this grows, this picture is taken even in our forest here in some rock outcroppings. It'll grow straight out of a rock basically. Monkey flower is an unusual one. It likes really wet conditions, blooms later summer and into the fall. So if you have a really wet, and it can take quite a bit of shade too, this could be an interesting one that the hummingbirds will come and visit. Now, so far we've talked about a lot of nectar sources, a little bit of insect sources, but I also wanted to throw in some that you're like, really? Thimbleweed. Thimbleweed, it has kind of a fluffy seed head later in the year, and the hummingbirds will actually use that for nesting. So when you're thinking about hummingbirds, I didn't want you to think about just the nectar sources, which is what we tend to see them at a lot. But if you want them to stick around, let's also think about a few other things, such as nesting sites. So this is one where they could use the material from that seed head as a nesting source. And walnut tree. We actually see lots and lots of hummingbirds in our walnut tree. For us specifically, we see it in the walnut tree because A, it's closest to our house and that's where we sit, so that's where we see a lot. And B, it's close to a lot of these nectar sources, so that's where we see them perch a lot. I'm sure they perch in a lot of our other trees as well. I just chose the walnut because that's what we see in our backyard. So basically just something for them to perch up on, to look around, to scope out, and even to nest. So that's my quick 15 plants in 15 minutes. I also wanted to point out and share, these are a few references that I think are fantastic. Birdscaping in the Midwest and native landscaping for wildlife and people. Both of these have sections specifically related to hummingbirds, and they also cover other pollinators or birds as well. But this is a great source to start there. So there's my 15 minutes, but I'll go ahead and open it up for any questions.
Thank you so much, Tracy. That was fabulous. And I was like, wow, she's really going to do 15 in 15 minutes.
Nailed it.
You totally did. So folks, don't be shy. Put questions in the chat and Q&A. I had a question for you we have, oh yes, great presentation is a comment. So yes, I agree. Um, so later, you talked about nesting and things. So later in the season, do you feel that do you see them often going more to like the insect providing plants? Like, have you noticed sort of a frequency shift between when they get here and like when they're nesting?
It's a good question because generally when they're traveling, they have nectar source versus when they're nesting, they tend to like more protein. Um, I haven't specifically observed that, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, and I think it's important what you were mentioning about insect sources as well for the nesting.
Yes.
Nesting, feeding babies that are hungry for protein.
Yep.
Let's see. Trying to make sure that I cover all of the locations upon which questions can be asked here. Let's see. When referring to part shade, about how many hours of sun exposure would that be? We have large trees in our yard. Great question.
It really depends on the species. So for some species, part shade could be, 5 hours a day. For others, it could be, I can actually survive in like 3 hours a day. And so it's really kind of plant specific. I know that's not the answer you're looking for. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about plants and what might work, you can definitely feel free to reach out to us. You can reach me at Tracy, Tracy, at sowildnatives.com. I probably should have put that on this last slide. I can put it, can I put it? I can put it in the chat.
Or Tracy, also, I would encourage people to go to the So Wild booth. So everyone that's in here is
Yes.
doing so from this app or the Hoover app. Go to the exhibitor booth for So Wild. Tracy put a really nice handout in there as well, and then your contact information is in there.
Yes.
I found. It's funny. I do have to check a couple different locations, but I found another question for you.
Okay.
Dee says they leave so fast. Do you get the hummingbirds to stick around longer with more plants?
I feel like they're here earlier this year. I don't know if that's just um, me noticing it more this year or if it really is the earlier this year. Um, I guess I can't really compare to whether having more or less plants gets them here, makes them stay around longer. But I will say when we see them the most is typically early, like now, and then late, like, oh gosh, my memory is fading me, but I want to say it's like August, September. Is that when they're migrating back, Dana?
That makes good sense.
That's when we see the highest fluctuations is spring and fall, and not as many in the summer.
Mm-hmm. I think part of that is that they're super territorial, and so your yard would probably support a lot more than mine because you have all these plants.
You have lots of plants now too, so
I do a lot of,
yeah.
not as many as you though. We have a couple questions about where, so let's see, Margie asked, where are you located? And then Elizabeth said, are you on Noland Road in KCMO?
Exactly. There you go. You can answer each other's questions there. Yes, we are on Nolan Road in Kansas City, south of 70, north of 350. For those of you who are familiar with that area, which is probably a limited number of you, there's a big nursery called Farron Farms. They're literally 3 houses north of us. So we have a small little nursery. It's actually behind our house. So you just kind of pull in behind our house, and we have a little cabin set up back behind the house, and our display tables and some demonstration gardens and stuff down there for you guys to peruse. So yeah, 6201 Noland Road. And again, like Dana was saying, you can visit our booth for even a little map to help you find where we're at.
And Tracy, you all are open right now Friday, all day Saturday, and then by appointment. Is that correct?
Correct. Fridays and Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we'll do that through June. And then starting in July, we're going to go to just first and third Friday and Saturday of the month through October.
And again, I know I said this at the beginning, but I was just there and I just found it really pleasant, really peaceful. It's just an experience in and of itself. It doesn't feel like I'm here to shop. It's like I wanted to just hang out for a really long time. So it was really, really beautiful.
Great. It's great to hear you say that because that's what we want.
And yeah, and so Elizabeth that asked about Nolan Road said, I'll be there.
All right.
So Ethan commented, just in response to that discussion about hummingbirds staying longer with more plants, is basically they know when it's time to leave. So it's really good to offer the very important sources of energy, the nectar and the insects, as you were speaking about, Tracy, to help them on their migration. But they know it's circadian rhythms basically, and daylight length, etc. So let's see. Margie says, thank you, anxious to visit.
Great.
Yes, let's see. What I can't tell who asked this. Can you maybe help me? Where are most of the plants you highlighted under walnut trees?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, because there's some plants that don't do well under walnut trees because of the jugulans.
Perfect.
We have two hummingbird gardens, and they're both near our walnut tree, and they have most of those plants in them. I'd have to look back and specifically remember which specific ones are okay under walnut trees or not. I found a really good website. I want to say it was Purdue University has a website of plants that work well with under walnuts, and that might be a good website to check out if you have some walnut trees. But yeah, most of the plants in our hummingbird gardens are right by our walnut tree, and they do fine.
Okay, so D or Dia, her meaning with the question about do you get the hummingbirds to hang out longer with more plants was more at the time. So she said, my meaning is that when I see them, they light on a plant and then leave that plant quickly.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's they're speedy. But if we have lots of plants, they'll go maybe from one plant to the next plant to the next plant. Having those perches, someplace for them to perch on, can help them kind of stick around a little bit longer. Even so, everybody wants to cut down my walnut tree or my maple tree that's in the back because it's dead. And I'm like, you are not allowed to cut down my dead tree. We call that a snag, and it's really, really great for wildlife. So even just today, we saw a scarlet tanager hanging out in our snag. And it's a good place to view those birds, even in the middle of summer, because there's no leaves trying to hide it. And on our walnut tree, we have some, the lower branches are kind of being shaded out by the higher branches, so they don't have leaves. They're kind of dying. And that's where we'll kind of see those hummingbirds perch. But yeah, as far as visiting plants, if we do have multiple, they'll visit one and then visit another and then visit another and maybe come back to another. So stick around that area a little bit longer, but they're still speedy.
So yeah, Tracy, D further elaborated on that question. How large of a planting would you recommend to encourage them to kind of do what you just described and kind of stay in the same area, going to multiple plants?
Our hummingbird gardens are really small. We have a pergola, which has the vine honeysuckle growing over it, the native honeysuckle. And then we have two on either end of them, and they're only like 4 feet wide by 3 feet deep. They're both pretty small, and we've packed, a good dozen plants into each one that bloom throughout the year, so that when we always have something blooming in our hummingbird garden. I feel like that's not that much area, but it's enough for them to stick around for a while, especially when there's multiple things blooming at the same time. So like our Bradbury bee balm and our penstemon and our purple beard tongue all kind of bloom at a similar time, and they'll just go from one to the other. The downy skullcap and the blue sage, when they bloom about the same time, you can see them kind of going back from one to the other. Oh, talking about feeders. The question is it necessary to hang up feeders if you have an abundance of plants or hummingbirds? I had started a chat. I wanted to hear people opinion. If you have feeders and you have plants, which do the hummingbirds visit most often? We don't have feeders. Because I'm a lazy gardener and that's a lot of maintenance. But B, because I think that a natural source for any animal is better than probably a made source. But in that chat, we had a few people comment that, yeah, the hummingbirds tend to visit the plants versus the feeders. And one of the reasons that we speculate, I don't know this, but might be because for that insect source as well.
Tracy, my understanding is that that's exactly right. That the nectar, the feeders are of course just like pure sugar, quick energy, boom. But they're getting insect as well as nectar when they visit the plant sources.
So yeah, we don't have a feeder, but we have plenty of hummingbirds.
I believe that's it, Tracy. Just doing the double check on everything here, but I think that's it. There's some, comments about that was a great presentation, and thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. And like I said, you guys are always welcome to reach out especially if you want to talk plants. I love to nerd out on plants.
Wonderful. Well, we'll let you go. But everyone, please, this was recorded, so you can review it again. And Tracy just gave a bunch of different resources. So good luck with your homers. Thanks so much, Tracy.
Yep.
All right. Bye, everybody.